So hello, everyone, and welcome to today's IAPC&M CPD Building Masterclass. My name is Judy Kennedy, and I'm your host. And today we welcome specialist leadership coach, master coach, mentor for in-house lawyers, and best-selling author, Donna McGrath. So welcome, Donna. Just a little bit of housekeeping first. Our call today will be a maximum of 1 hour, including 15 minutes Q&A. The session is recorded, so please mute yourself, but do keep your video on. It makes it for a lot nicer for the speaker. So they see they're not talking to themselves. Please use the chat box for questions and suggestions. I will be asking Donna in a minute if she wants to take them during or at the end. But to our theme now. So we are looking at empathy as leadership skill, and the very interesting question, as we can see from our already off-record conversation, is it a curse or is it a gift? So I hope you have your pen and paper at hand to make the most of this, and over to you, Donna.
Thank you so much indeed, Julie, for introducing me. Yes, we already had started the discussion before we went live. So welcome everybody who is here. Thank you so much for taking the time out to build your own skills and to develop your understanding of empathy, and whether it is a gift or it is a curse. And I'm looking at this today with the view of leadership within capital organizations. We're not looking at it today from a general value perspective, and we're not looking at it in a different type of organization, because empathy is important. I just want to pre-frame this to make sure that everybody's aware that we're talking about empathy specifically for leaders in the corporate world. So thank you for all of you who have joined already. I've already spoke to Shari. Thank you so much for giving me information so I could learn more about you. We've only got a couple of us here, so let's get you to introduce yourselves. Max, how you doing? Are you here to learn about empathy? Are you a coach, or are you a leader or an aspirational leader?
So I'm personally, I'm here because I really want to learn about empathy. I think it's something that, you know, I haven't received any formal training in, and I'm not a leader at the moment, certainly not in any formal way. But I'm really keen and really interested to learn more about it, because, you know, aspirational leader sounds good. So that's what drew me to this session leader today.
Brilliant. And so what about yourself?
Hi, Donna. Hello there. I'm here as a coach. A lot of the ladies I coach are professional women who in some form or another are kind of leading teams, etc., managing teams. And my background is corporate IT projects, global IT projects in different sorts of roles, from stream leads to project managers, etc., etc. So
Amazing.
So I'm interested from both sides.
Thank you. And Lorraine, we
Hello.
know. I know Lorraine.
Hi.
Just
Hello,
for
everybody.
the purposes of everybody else, could you let us know whether you're here to for the learning, or because you're an aspirational leader, or you're a leader, just for the purposes of everybody else? I already know the answer to this.
Yeah, I guess it's more so for the learning, but it's to align, I guess, with where I've taken the leadership in projects and on various different matters, and just to understand if I was doing the right thing in the right way and trying to improve on that going forward. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. So I'll crack on. If there's other people joining, sorry, I won't get the opportunity to ask you, but if you could put your name in the chat, and while you're here, whether you are a coach, a leader, an aspirational leader, or just here for the learning, that'd be great. Thank you. So the goal today, the purpose of today, is to talk about empathy in a way that people don't talk about it. It's to really think about why empathy is such a big subject at the moment, and the world that the discussion around empathy is happening in, and why the narrative around empathy that we have at the moment can make empathy a curse. I'm also going to talk to you about the actual truth about empathy, because there is a lot of garbage out there in the market, in the leadership world, where everybody thinks they're an expert on empathy. I think I'm an expert in empathy, but that's okay, as long as everybody is very careful with the way that they position it in terms of how far empathy should go before it becomes a curse, and how far it can go before it stops being unhelpful. Sorry, my cat was trying to get in through the door. So the journey I'm going to take you on today is, first of all, we're going to look at the relevance of empathy in today's world. And then we're going to look at what empathy is and it isn't. This is where there's a little bit of confusion out there, and I just want to get that locked down about what empathy actually is. And with that view of what it is, how it can actually be helpful or unhelpful. I'm also going to talk to you about the limitations and the potential curses of empathy. And then I'm going to talk about the skills that are actually needed around empathy to actually turn it into a gift. So just a little bit of introduction about me. Julie's kindly already introduced me. So you're probably wondering what gives me the authority to speak on this subject. So my name's Donna McGrath, and I'm a former solicitor, and I am now a leadership coach for in-house lawyers. I set my business up in 2020, just as a pandemic started, like every other coach. And I actually set up and founded the in-house lawyers leadership program, because I recognized a lot of my former colleagues were really, really struggling, and I thought they needed a little bit of help. And I set that business up after I actually became qualified through Mastercoach, which is a separate organization under the IAPC&M, and I achieved level 5 at that stage. And as Julie has said, recently I have published a book on leadership, and I co-authored it with 8 other people, and it's all about leadership and the different aspects of leadership and how you can inspire others into leadership. And it's called Breaking Barriers. If you do want to have a copy of the link to take a look at it, I'm more than happy to share that in the chat. And also, if you want to learn a little bit more about me, I can share my link on my social links in the chat, but I'll do that in a little bit. I'm also currently studying psychology and human behavior, and I hopefully will turn that into a master's, and maybe sometime within the next couple of years I might actually finish it. So I said I was going to talk about the relevance of empathy in today's world. So as you all probably are aware, you're all probably aware of this, but I just think it's really important to bring this into the context of this conversation, where the demand for empathy in leadership has actually come from. So you all probably are very aware of it, but I just think let's bring it into our consciousness in the context of what we're talking about. So as you might already know, the demand for empathy as a leadership skill was actually born out of an era where mental health awareness and studies on how leaders actually impact other people, and consequently the businesses that they operate in a particular way. Now, the leaders who this empathy training and the need for empathy is really targeted at is baby boomers and Generation X, because the millennials and the Generation Z have been brought up within a different social construct than the rest of us. I say the rest of us. I can't see everybody, but I assume. I don't want to assume. So the thing is to identify whether you are what you are in terms of what generation it is. Baby boomer is 1946 to 1964. Generation X is 1965 to 1979, millennials 1980 to 1994, and Generation Z is 1995 to 2012. So I myself am at the very end of Generation X, and some of my good friends are millennials, but they still have a lot of the Gen Z traits. And I also know a lot of Gen X's who have a lot of millennial traits. So there's a bit of an overlap with those two generations. When it comes to Generation Z, they're completely different in the way that the social constructs which they've been brought up in, which you all already know. So I have been doing a lot of research around the Gen X, for example, and why Gen X's, there's a big focus on Gen X's and baby boomers to have empathy and bring it into the workplace. So if we actually sit back and think, and I'm sure you all probably know this, and think about the way the world was whenever Gen X's were brought up. We're talking about 1965 to 1979. In those years, there was massive economic downturn. We were in a lot of perennial wars as well. There was a lot of, even though now we still have it now, it's come back round again, but during the Gen X time specifically, there was a lot of foreign wars, and there was also a lot of new sexually transmitted disease. Well, that we started to become aware of them more, and in order to get through those periods, the Gen X's and the baby boomers are even more resilient. If you think they'd lived through a war, and the resources that they didn't have and that weren't given to them, and they just had to survive. And the Generation X kind of is a bit of a tail off the back of that. So I'm not putting every Gen X into this category, but a lot of research has been done to understand the attitudes of the Gen X, which are more kind of very hardworking, get on with it, stop complaining, and just do the work. Stop moaning is a very, very strong trait predominantly within that generation. And I've actually got a quote from from an article that I read from a guy called Elwood Watson. He's a doctor, and he wrote a book called Generation X and the Spirit of Resilience. It's a really great article if you want to take a note on this. And he said that it is the resilience that I've just explained that causes the Gen X to have a lot of tenacity, and that they're equipped with the ability to be adaptable when needed and to deal with uncertainties in the workplace and in life. Now compare that to where Gen Zs were brought up. So they didn't have the same societal struggles. They were born into a faster moving society with a massive rise in use in technology, where there was a massive greater demand for things to be quicker because technology was evolving. The world was expecting people to evolve and be fast with the Gen Zs, with the technology. So their struggles are slightly different. Back in the Gen X days, whenever people said they were stressed, it was because it was a big event has happened. So whenever a Gen Z looks into the world of the Gen X look into the world of the Gen Z, and they say they're always moaning about being stressed. Well, there's a reason for that, because there's a lot more demand. There's a lot more external triggers. There's a lot more access to external triggers through social media and through the expectation that the world has in this digital age, which can be very hard for people that was brought up in an age where things took the time that they needed to, that hard work was the way through. So the Gen Zs are trying to find a quick way around things to get things done. So already you have got a massive gap between the two generations. And with the Gen Z being more triggered, if you like, with the fast pace, and the Gen X as well, to some extent as well, anxiety levels started to rise because people, rather than having this one event that would cause stress or anxiety, it's consistently there. And as all you coaches will already know, that you're dealing with people that's consistently stressed, and they've got high levels of cortisol constantly in their body because of the demands that their organization has on them because of the development of technology. So the problem that the Gen Zs had in the workplace, whenever they come to work with kind of the Gen X, because the Gen X would have been their bosses mostly, excuse me, and still are. And because of the attitude of the Gen X, oh, stop moaning, get on with it, stop, whatever. There was a lot of discourse between the two generations. And this caused a little bit of an uprise in awareness. And the Gen Zs actually did have and do have mental health issues. Anxiety is very different now to what it was before. Gen X's were not understanding it. So it was a massive, massive rise in mental health issues because they were being ignored in the workplace. And this required a demand for change, which required leaders to become, and human beings, to become more self-aware of their impact, particularly in the workplace. Therefore, there has been a greater responsibility to develop skills and create what we call psychologically safe spaces, which I have my own issues with, and to be aware of their own emotions and behaviours. As we know, our emotions leak, even though it doesn't manifest into behaviour, it leaks. And then the behaviours that come along with that can have a massive impact. So there's this demand to change. And one of the big shifts in that change is a demand for the Gen X leaders to have a little bit more empathy for those others that have got these issues that are present and real within the workplace. Does anybody have any questions on that? Okay, brilliant. So what I want to move on to is, with that background, is to understand how that how the demand for empathy and empathy training and being more empathetic has caused problems, even further problems. So there has become this massive debate now between whether you be empathetic, or you be empathetic to others, or you help them to be resilient. Because guess what? The two don't work together. They're two opposite concepts. And with a generation like the Gen X's who are resilient and have this get on with it attitude, they can't really, as I say, understand the younger generation. So they struggle with that. And then the second bit that doesn't really help is that the messaging on empathy from scholars who are continuously talking about empathy is actually telling people you need to protect people from harm, when in a capitalist environment is not good. That's my view. But the message is to care and protect. And alongside of that, the leaders are under this pressure to be more empathetic as well, because they're now getting measured on ESG and corporate social responsibility around how they deal with their employees. And this is actually going to impact in the future now how the business gets revenue and how it gets investment. So it's a massive, massive pressure. And the impact is that leaders are being told that this is an essential leadership trait, and in order to be successful in their organizations. And the problem is, it's not working. Whoops, sorry. Did I not do that? It's not working, because what's happening is I'm speaking to some of my clients, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, that the pendulum between resilience and empathy has swung too far left for the leaders. Over the last 3 years, I've coached about 150 leaders and people into leadership. And they're coming to me as leaders emotionally exhausted and overwhelmed with the people issues. because they feel like they have to thread a really tight rope between being supportive and actually delivering business results. And I wonder for you coaches out there whether you are actually experiencing the same thing. So I think it's really essential in this training that they are being told the truth. Leaders are being told the truth about what empathy is, and we need to demystify it and give them what they actually need to transform. We need to move away from talking about empathy to transformation. So the question is then, what is empathy? I have looked up, this is really, really interesting. So there has been two scholars, psychologists, Daniel Goleman and Paul Ekman, E-K-M-A-N, who really were really clear on what empathy was about 10 years ago. They've changed their mind. And it's confusing. So rather than empathy being what, we're going to talk about what empathy is a little bit later, these guys have spread it out into three areas. There is, as they define it, as cognitive empathy, which is the ability to know how the other person feels and what they might be thinking, sometimes called what they call perceptive taking, which I don't know about you, but the last time I dropped my crystal ball in the workplace and actually to think about what people are actually thinking, it doesn't work anymore. So that's what they're saying empathy is, and that leaders need to be able to have the ability to know how the other person feels cognitively. Then there's the next one is emotional, which I should actually believe this is where a true empath is and where they lie, who is someone who naturally just feels the emotion of a room or someone else. Now, being an empath myself, whenever I was the head of legal of Holland and Barrett, our legal office, which was tiny, meant that we had the route through to that office meant that we had to walk through the IT team. And I walked through the IT team one day and I came in and I just sat down and I felt so depressed and I didn't know why. And I just said, I just feel like someone's died. And within a space of a couple of minutes, the legal director came in, not the legal director, the IT director came in and said, we have someone just die in our team. And the girls in my team were like, you're a witch. I'm like, no, that's empathy. Because you actually feel the room. Now, I was brought up in an Irish family. I'm not saying that we've got witchy ways or anything like that. But one of the things that I've noticed with myself and with my family, that we do have very high empathy. And that is called emotional empathy. This is something that's very difficult to control. And then they've defined empathy as this third part, empathy being compassion. So it's compassionate empathy. And they've defined this as this kind of empathy. We not only understand the person's predicament and feel with them, but are spontaneously moved to help if needed. Has anyone else heard of those three parts of empathy? No. I'm not surprised, Sue and Shari, because you probably actually know what empathy actually is. These guys have actually confused the whole thing. And moving on to the actual definition of empathy and what it was before these guys decided to come in and redefine it, it means that you're experiencing someone else's feelings. Ladies, do you understand that as the definition of empathy? Yeah. And it really requires an emotional component of feeling what the other person is feeling. So that is somewhere where someone is naturally an empath. And this is where I think there's a massive problem with teaching empathy. Empathy is an emotion that you actually find it really easy to experience or you don't. And it requires for someone to be really good at it is to really delve deep into maybe why they've got certain blockages and why they don't feel it. So it requires the leader to do a hell of a lot of self-work before they can actually help other people, and they don't get told that, which is not fair. I thought it'd be good to set out the definitions of sympathy and being compassionate, which is quite similar to the previous definitions of cognitive and compassionate empathy. Sympathy means that you actually understand someone's suffering more cognitively, but you don't feel their feelings. You actually are looking in at their situation, so you're feeling for them, not with them. So you're not experiencing their emotions, you're experiencing your emotions towards their situation. Two massive different things. One is yours, the other is theirs. The other thing that I've noticed that people don't get taught through teaching this in the in-house lawyers leadership program is the difference between those two things. Because I do a leadership assessment and I actually test empathy. Ironically, I do label it empathy, but it's just because they can understand it. And some people don't understand the difference between understanding where someone's at by observing them and asking them questions and actually physically feeling the feelings. And there's some people I've worked with and they actually physically feel other people's feelings, which makes their judgment off, which is another problem with empathy. And then compassion is the emotional response to sympathy or empathy, which is the desire to help. And this desire to help in compassion, I would say in here, probably could also be described as caring enough to want to help to do something about it. So you're not just keeping them in that emotional state. So just to pause there for a second, because I know that's a lot of information that I've just threw at you. Is there any of that that is new to any of you? Feel free to put your hand up. Is that what you're understanding, the coaches in the room of Shari and Sue? Yeah, and Lorraine, Max, you've gone quiet.
Max
Yeah, that's
does say it's new to him, though. I see he's written there. It's totally new to me, he says.
Oh, brilliant.
In the chat. Yeah.
Thank you, Max. So where you are in your development, it might be
Thank you, Donna.
if you are going to hear anything about empathy, you're more likely to hear this stuff, as in the cognitive, emotional, and compassion. Think of those three as sympathy, empathy, and compassion, because that's what they are. That's the difference. And whenever they start to confuse empathy and talk about empathy as a skill, they're more likely talking about sympathy and compassion because they don't understand this part of empathy. And if they actually knew that someone was an empath, they would never, ever take them down that road. So let's talk about some truths about empathy in the mode that we actually understand that it is actually taking someone else's feelings and sitting with them. So another that you're going to love that. I don't know whether, Shari, this is the one that you were mentioning earlier on. Paul
That's the one.
Yeah, brilliant. A Yale psychologist. He is brilliant. Have you read a lot of his stuff? He's just fantastic. I would recommend everybody to read him. He talks about the case against empathy and the case for rational compassion. And I'm speaking about another philosopher, not psychologist after this and what they say. He confirms that empathy gets in the way of making decisions because it's an emotional response. And sometimes, yes, we can go with our gut, which is fine. And sometimes I've made decisions on my gut and it's been the right decision. But if we're going to help other people and go with our gut, what we think other people should do isn't necessarily right for them. And if we start to solutionizing for other people, we don't allow them to grow the cognitive thinking that they need in order to be able to help themselves. He also says that it can drive unhelpful emotions and behavior simply because of the emotional response. He also said it can be very biased and prejudiced and overly emotional and sometimes very selfish. And I've got the actual quote here. He says that we tend to show even less concern for people in different nations who are at arm's length in terms of values and background. This is because it's easier to relate and feel for people who are more like us. So if we take that even into the workplace, if we have someone around us and we don't have similar values, we're less likely to want to be empathetic towards them than someone that we do. So that can actually lead to problems in terms of equality and how people are actually treated within the workplace. So we need to be mindful of that. And again, that's not taught or talked about. Again, as I said before, it gets in the way of making the best decisions and the wrong solutions. And sorry, the best decisions then can lead to wrong solutions. I don't know why my thing's gone a little bit. And that it can also inhibit growth in other people, where if we are going in to help and we go in to tell them what to do, as opposed to coach them to think for themselves, we inhibit their growth and their confidence, and they will never become leaders of the future. So this whole thing about empathy right now, given the evidence that we've already that we've talked about today, it isn't actually helping our future. It isn't helping our future to grow. It isn't helping future leaders, because we are all enabling and being there to tell people what to do. This is why I love coaching over mentoring, because coaching actually really helps you to ask the really powerful questions to get them to start this working and build up new neural pathways for them to think for themselves. This is why coaching is the way forward for leaders, in my humble opinion. It's not really humble, was it? So question to you. Well, outside the actual clients that you work with, if you were generally in a workplace in a very environment where you're not a coach, would you tend to help people who you relate to more and that you like more than people that maybe you just don't really get? It's time to ask ourselves honest questions. Lorraine, you just help everybody.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think it's a case of, well, generally we're so busy. As you know, as people send you requests, you just help the people as they come to you. But I would doubt very much with the legal sector that you have a choice as in, oh, I'm going to help that person, but not that person because I don't like what they like. You know what I mean? I don't think you have that. Yeah, that way.
Okay, I completely understand what you're saying in terms of legal work, because that's actually just doing your job. But what I'm talking about here is sitting down with someone and really understanding their problem and really helping them through it because you care enough to do it, not just their legal problems.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Max, if you could just pop your question in the chat, we can address it at the end. It's just a little thought. So this young man here is Jordan B. Peterson, a very charismatic and opinion-splitting human being from a political perspective, but let's put that aside. That's not the part of him that we want to talk about today. He is a fantastic orator, and he is a clinical psychologist, and he has written quite a lot of papers on empathy. And there's one in particular that is more recent that he wrote around empathy and compassion, actually. I thought it was interesting. And he has said from a clinical perspective that there is a problem with far too much empathy. He's actually done an interview on this as well, because it assumes that there is an inequitable weight of distribution of everything. Now, I thought this was really insightful, because in the workplace where you have a leader and a team member, the team member that I work with predominantly think that the leader does have power over them. Now, if we let them feed into that narrative that someone else does have power over you, whether it's the police, whether it's the king, whether it's the your mum and dad, that can cause an unhealthy balance of power between you. So one of the things that he says, even in the workplace, that if you actually go in and just assume that other person's a human being and forget about the role, you're more likely to be successful in your conversations, and get more out of those conversations because you're turning up without that cloud of power over you. And I thought that was really interesting. So he also said that it instills a belief that someone else has power over them, which I've already said, and it can be very disempowering for that individual. Now, a lot of the work that I do helps people take the power back into their to themselves and into their relationships, whether it be with a boss, whether it be with a partner, or whether it be with their stakeholders that they work with in an organization. Because as soon as we give someone that power, because we're giving that away, we're giving it psychologically, and saying, oh, well, they're in control of my career. Well, actually, no, they're not. You are. You've also chosen to be there. You can also choose not to be there. So a lot of the work that I do with clients is to kind of help them get that power back. And this is why I wanted to really highlight this point that Jordan has actually said, that is so important that we do not fill our clients' narrative that there is an equitable weight of distribution in everything, because it's only in here if we give it. Perception is everything. And also he says it reduces independence of the individual, and it takes a person from relying on someone else to get the answer away from them. So if they're always relying on someone else to give them the answer, and the leader isn't kind of coaching them to think for themselves, that reduces their independence. And I see a lot of leaders do that to retain talent. They don't, sometimes some of them, not saying that every leader does this, but there is a trait where if a leader has got this particular trait where they're in fear and they don't want to lose good people in their team, rather than growing them, they then inhibit them. And then those people leave. I can see you, Sue, shaking your head, or not shaking your head, but nodding. So he says we must let others maintain their independence, and which allows them and us to develop, because the more we can give people their power, the more we develop, because we're losing control, and that's okay sometimes, because it's not ours to have, it's theirs as leaders. It's not theirs, it's someone else's, because it's their journey. As I say, it's your movie, it's their movie. So he actually said, one of his points, he said that on its own, empathy is unhealthy. He said we need to learn how to empower. So he talks about being in that, if you are an empath, that you're able to shift yourself out of that emotion and separate your emotions from theirs, be able to then hold the space so that person can actually properly speak and talk to you about their actual issue. And you're able to do that without judgment. And when you're in that moment, that you can actually start asking them questions to understand what their issue is, and then asking them the great coaching questions to help them start to change the way they're thinking about their problem. So as I said earlier on, there's a lot of evidence of this out there. And what I mean by this is the misinterpretation of what empathy is, a lot of distress by leaders because they're really confused about what their role is. As I said earlier, I've coached over 150 legal leaders in the last 3 years who are completely exhausted, overburdened, and they've no self-care. Now, you would think that a lot of them come to me because they've got too much work on. It's not. It's because of the emotional demand of what they should be doing as leaders within an organization, which is really sad. And it's because of this additional duty of being a leader and what that means as a leader. And they take solicitors, I'm sure other people too, but solicitors in particular, take their duties very, very seriously because they're regulated individuals. And if they don't, then they could lose their license and their livelihood and potentially end up in prison over small breaches. So these guys like to take their duties really, really heavily. And they've also talked to me about how it's impacting their team when they are really confused about empathy and how to really manage the team. And whenever they are getting into that empathy mode and kind of taking more responsibility for their team's emotions, they have said that their team, rightly or wrongly, they've said that their teams have become very, very sensitive, that everything's an issue. There's a lot more demand of their time and attention to deal with kind of little matters, nebulous little matters that maybe they should be able to figure out for themselves. And when they don't get it, they get really increased anxiety and they can become quite demanding of the leader. And in itself, that environment isn't healthy for the leader if they have to bring results out as well of the team and get the team to be high performing. So what's the answer? If it's not empathy and it's not resilience, what is the answer here? So Paul Bloom says that the answer is rational compassion will help you make better decisions than empathy. And Jordan B. Peterson says, well, allow others to find their own way, but with a light touch along the way. I actually think those answers are really bad. They're not great. Because it still kind of leaves a gap between the leader actually helping, being able to do something about it and feel that they can, that they're still in control, but at the same time, that individual is completely empowered. So we want to turn it into a gift. And there are a couple of other skills that I think that they need in order to do this. But the two that I'm going to talk about today is self-awareness and the ability to empower others through people management and environmental awareness. So the first one is awareness. The first rule, the first thing that they need to understand is what their actual role is in that conversation with the person in front of them. Are they there to solve the problems? Are they there to guide them? Or are they there to develop them? Now, the better thinking in their head would probably be there to develop the person in front of them. However, as always, time can not be your best friend as a leader, and sometimes you do have to be directive. But it's that creating that judgment to know which one is the right answer. But a part of that is to understand their own emotions and thoughts and belief systems and the things that they tell themselves and how they process the world and how that actually impacts them from believing that they can actually empower other people. If they're giving themselves the wrong narrative, they won't feel it and they won't believe it. So as a coach, I think they need coaching to be able to do this, to understand themselves a little bit more and to unpack their unhelpful processing and also their unhelpful belief systems that are holding them back. And this is all about catching their own emotions, asking them if they're being caught up in their emotions and how they're feeling. One question I thought was a really interesting one that someone told me whenever I presented this, something like this a couple of years ago, was a good question could be, well, how were you feeling before you went into that conversation, and do a little bit of a comparison? I thought that was a really good practical tip. And again, as I say, it's being aware of what your role is generally and in that conversation, and to avoid becoming the rescuer and making the choice between whether you're going to be the rescuer or someone who's going to empower. I know some people on here will already know the victim triangle But for Max and Lorraine, anybody who doesn't know what it is, the victim triangle is simply a triangle with at every end, one end you've got a perpetrator, another one is a victim, and another one is a rescuer. So sometimes whenever the rescuer speaks to the victim and they try to rescue them, what actually happens, it exacerbates the issue between the victim and the perpetrator, because they're trying to solve that problem and they're not, the victim isn't being given the ability to actually figure it out for themselves. So if you go back to schoolyard and you and your friend had a wee fight or whatever, and you said to someone else later on, oh, they're just picking on me, they're really, really mean. That other person then tries to rescue and go to that other person to say something about it. That causes drama and creates a bigger victim cycle. So this is the exact same in work. An example, if someone was coming to complain, let's say someone called Betty was complaining about John to you, rather than saying to Betty, oh, I'll have a speak with John, the better thing is to do is to empower them to have the conversation with John. Again, being the person that's going to empower the person. I know some of you probably already know these and think, Donna, for goodness sake, I'm here to learn something, but I just thought it might be a good reminder about mind hacks, that if you're leaders or if you are a leader and you are in a situation where someone is a little bit emotional and you recognize and catch your emotion, think, actually, I'm not in a good place myself. Here are some things to remind people to do to kind of help them change their state, how to trick their mind into thinking differently. As I always say, create a pause, create a little bit of space, breathe, conscious breathing, drink some water and go for movement, have some movement to get those things moving around differently and increase the testosterone in your body to fight the cortisol. Trick your brain through physicality. This lady here in front of us is doing the Wonder Woman pose. I don't know if any of you have read any of the Amy Cuddy work. Amy is a good friend of mine. She is absolutely brilliant. And she has done a lot of research and study over the years, and she's refined what she said before. But she has said that whenever, particularly women, when we stand up with our back right and put our shoulders straight and back, I can see people doing it, that we actually start, it's something to do with our vagus nerve, starts to produce testosterone. And what it does, it puts shots of testosterone into your brain. And what that does, it actually calms down the cortisol that's getting into your cognitive function. And when we know whenever the cortisol goes into your cognitive function, it actually slows down your ability to think straight. So apparently doing this can actually help you get clarity of mind. The third rule is, I'm going to give you some of my tools as well. If you ladies maybe already have your own tools, and anybody here who wants to really empower other people, I said earlier on, ask them questions, try to understand. I'm going to give you a little framework here, what you can use as well. I call it the triple S. So rather than, and whenever someone is talking to you about the problem and they're going way off here with their emotions and they're getting into tangents, and sometimes you just want to bring it back to what the issue is. Sometimes that person, all they need is for you to acknowledge their emotions. So the first day is to acknowledge. And guess what? They will stop and they will say thank you. That allows them to create a little bit of space for cognitive thinking, because they're in emotions. To ask someone who's in an emotional state to get them into cognition, ask them a practical question. But we're going to do that in a bit. Before we move into saying or acknowledging, we have to appease. Now, appease doesn't mean to say that you're agreeing with them. You just appease in the situation. And sometimes how I do it is, if someone was coming along to me because someone else in the team had said something to them and they're very, very upset, I would say to them, look, I completely understand why you feel that way and why him speaking like that to you, in particular her, because I knew I wouldn't hopefully know what's important to that person, why that would be really, really important for you. And then I move into asking the questions. And some of you ladies are coaches, so you know what questions to ask. You don't need me to tell you that. But just for the purposes of anybody who is not a coach or maybe wants to top up what a powerful question is, these tend to start with who, what, where, when, which, and how. We don't want to ask why, because of the recent studies out there on why. Why can now? Because we live in a very Gen Z world, they can feel that they're being accused of something. So we tend to want to stay away from that. There might be, this is especially for lawyers that I've worked with, they've got a massive need to give advice. They give advice to everyone. So this one's for you, Lorraine. Try not to advise them. Don't give them the answer or tell them the answer. And also don't accept their first answer, because they're lying to themselves, because they haven't understood the truth yet. You need to keep asking, and what else? And what else? And what else? And how does that impact you? And what is that? And then you will get to the truth. And when you get to the truth, it's when they realize this is what I can do. And you just need to ask them a question that will drive them into taking action. And so they can take the steps in the solution. The good thing about asking these questions, if the leader does know what they want them to do, and rather than telling them, they can actually see where there's just a little breakdown in their thinking. And that's whenever the leader can really guide in there and be a little bit more directive, so they know what to be directive on. And then if the leader does give a little bit of information, you got to ask the question after and say, well, what does that change about what you've thought? So those are the 3 roles that I think leaders need to learn to actually demonstrate empathy, as opposed to just having it. It's also a good way for the leader to get out of that being caught up in those empathetic emotions, if they're an empath. And even if they're not an empath, they have got a little process here that they can adopt, so the other person is feeling that they're actually being heard, because that's all they want. There are some long-term strategies that I do in my program, but I'm not going to go through that here for the purposes of this. Some of you will already know what these are. Is just developing your self-awareness, emotional management, people management, and environmental awareness, which I think is the most under talked about awareness out there. So, skill summary, what do they need? The thing that the summary is, empathy is a feeling of others' emotions. Let's just get that out there. Let's get that straight. It's nothing more, nothing less. The impactful skills are that we all need to, leaders and everybody around us, need to develop self-awareness so that we are aware that we're not inhibiting our growth and other people's by the way that we turn up. I don't mean turn up as in a vegetable, I mean turn up, because I used to get that as feedback. I spoke really fast. Not to make it about you, not make it about the leader. It's always about someone else. As soon as we make it about us, that can be seen miles away. People aren't idiots anymore. And this, as much as I talk about the Gen X, then Gen Zs, and they are a more spiritual generation as well, and they can see through cracks that we once didn't. So they have got brilliant skills. Ask curious questions to understand. But first demonstrate empathy through acknowledging them and appeasing, then asking a powerful question to trigger their cognitive function and allow them the space to think their own way through. And also let them know that you're there to talk and support. So tell them what they want, but give them what they need. Any questions? And have I gone over?
Goodness, my head is exploding. This is very insightful. I mean, really excellent. Lots of ways of looking at it that I hadn't actually thought of before, and very thought-provoking. I know I'm going to be chewing on this quite a bit tonight. Are there any questions? We have another 5 minutes here. Anybody have any specific question? I know some of you have looked into this question a lot more than others. There's no wrong question. Anybody have anything they would like to ask Donna directly?
Anything you disagree with?
Also.
I don't have anything I disagree with, Donna, but one question. If you do have the ability to feel other people's emotions, is there a time or a place outside of work when that can be switched off?
No, that is a skill.
Yeah, because I think it's a great skill to have and all the rest. However, we talk about pressure and we talk about people being exhausted and overloaded, etc., etc. Mixed with being able to feel people's emotions can be very overwhelming. And my question is to the corporate world, when do you switch that off and how is it being switched off?
Well, my question to the corporate world to answer that is, don't be encouraging people to be empathetic. Encourage them to transform.
I agree.
Because you said at the other side, being another Irish, I don't know why it's Irish people that come to me that have got naturally massive empaths, and it's very, very difficult. They get really upset. I couldn't understand it whenever I remember getting criticized in school because I watched an episode of a TV show and coming in the next day and I was really upset about it, and people were thinking, is there something wrong with her? And I had too much empathy. I knew the difference between reality and not reality.
I ended up, and this is just a story. I ended up I've had this for a couple of years now, but I ended up going to an uncle's funeral about a year and a half ago, and it was very sad and all the rest, and he passed away. Everybody around me were all crying. I wanted to, but I wasn't able to, because whatever had been switched on, I just wasn't able to cry. It could have been as you said earlier, Donna, the testosterone or whatever. It was at such levels that I was just completely emotionless. And that is not the person I used to be, because I used to be the person who would cry watching a movie if it was happy or really sad, and that's changed completely now. Probably changed for the better, I'm not complaining or anything, but I'm just saying, when does that get switched off? Because it can get quite overwhelming.
Yeah, it is. And this is where a lot of people that I work with, as you'll find out, that empathy, we need to learn to switch this off. And that processing off, and reframe. Only if you want to, some people enjoy it, some people don't. And the question is it really impacting your life to the extent that it's detrimental for you? And some people that I've been working with, it has been. So this is why I think that empathy's got a very difficult side to manage for empaths, which is true empaths.
Yeah, sometimes things are meant to be when I was asked to host this one, because this for me is a real wake-up call, and I have that, and I struggle almost increasingly. Yeah. And it's not just, I actually absorb other people's emotions, which is totally useless. Because then instead of being able to help them properly, I then take it home with me or after the conversation, etc. So this is actually
what Jordan Peterson said. He actually said, I think I might have actually taken that out. He said it's absolutely useless.
It is useless. And I am aware of that. And but it's finding how to create that space and to take back, to be there, with a compassionate, empathetic outlook, but without it becoming my pain, but without me taking or frustration or struggle or whatever it is. Yeah.
And we want to do that with wisdom.
Yes.
We want to do it with wisdom, because you don't want to cut it off and then it go the other way.
Yeah. And I'm
So-
sure if managed, it can be a gift, as you were saying. I mean, to answer your question, it's a curse if left free rein. You know, it's not actually helping. It's not creating that space to empower the other to find their own solutions. And you're just, you know, overwhelming your own self. I have to always have quiet time after big meetings because I've just absorbed so much from so many people. But I mean, I thank you very much for that. We have reached to the end. I've taken page after page after page of notes. I hope you all have too, and the particular links and names. You did mention you were going to put, before I switch off,
yes.
you said you were going to
I'll do
put
that now.
the link to your book and to your social media. I think you said you were going to put
Yes,
in
I
our
did.
chat.
I did say that. So this is the book. It's a big long link. So that's the book.
Okay.
This is social media. LinkedIn is my place. And if you could link with me on LinkedIn, then I can link with you on LinkedIn too, and we can share. Has anyone, I suppose we got to go. I was going to ask a question, but it's fine.
I'll go on for one last one, but we do, as long as it's not too long.
Just ask, what's been your biggest takeaway from that today? What are you going to do differently, if anything?
Practice more on how to control it, and also understand when it's a hindrance, but how to then turn it, as in how you empower others, and you know what I mean, deal with it differently than what I have been, which has been just absorbing and not knowing what it is fully, if that makes sense, or the impact it can have. Yeah.
Brilliant,
Yeah.
Marianne. So
For me, it's spotting it when it's happening quicker, being sharp on it. I do it. I am an empath, and you get the whole transference thing then, and then you're no good to anybody in a coaching session. But it's also understanding what's the big trigger for that. It's one thing to be an empath, but if you're a fixer underneath that because of your own kind of psychological and upbringing, it's like just being committed to digging in a counseling scenario or wherever it is to understand.
Yeah. So
to
that's
understand.
self-awareness piece, isn't it? What about you, Shari?
I think it would be encouraging leaders to view it more than as bring out more compassion and empowering people.
Yeah. Thank you.
That would be my.
And I see Max
Max
has answered in the chat. He answered how to ask empowering questions is his biggest takeaway, avoiding the why and not spoon feeding answers.
Well done, Max.
Thank you very, very much. Please put your notes, your CPD log, so that we can actually take this and use it. And I mean, I'm certainly going to be in contact with you myself. And thank you very, very much for lots of big questions here and lots of answers. So thank you also for sharing very many of your tips and your way of seeing things. And good luck, because I do think that this tide does need to be reversed even more so now. So thank you for being here, Donna. Thank you, everyone, for making time for being here today, and see you this time next week, I think.